Hey, fool, how's it
Pretty
going?
good.
AMB.
Yeah, it seemed like a good enough day. To be honest, like I'm not even surprised. There's Hans. I'll add him. Um, I mean, there had to be an explanation why there was no release of the like March and May 302s of Danchenko interviews, and this is obviously what it was. Um, See, I'm going to bring Hans in here. Add him as a co-host. Um, just wait for some other people. I know Ryan wanted to come in. I know Lee Smith was very interested in coming in here. Hey, everybody. Hans, you there? Let me add him again. Oh, no. I don't think you can cancel that. All right, obviously, for the people coming in, this is basically going to be a discussion about. All right, Hans accepted it. Terrific. What's up, Hansi?
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. I
Big
mean,
day.
like, yeah, I mean, it's a great day. It's just like how
It,
how much worse
you
can the
know,
FBI look, to be honest? But I mean, it's not surprising to me. So like, I'm just completely like, I saw
you
this
know
shit
how
coming.
you know how I feel. It feels very reminiscent of November of last year when Danchenko was first indicted. Remember, we had a chat back then, one of these chats, and the great Michael Caputo came on and had a
Oh
lot to
yeah.
say. That was
Oh,
so
I
much
mean,
fun.
that was like one of the best. The Iggy's like prison shower. I think like Gene like retweeted that out again. But yeah, I mean, just him burning him down. That was one of the best. But I
And
mean, it's
so
so.
I think today is like that, and in a way, it's even better, but also worse, as you say, because the information we got today is even worse than the information we got last year.
Oh no, yeah, and like the problem is like I'm like it's like I'm almost like fatigued, like just fatigued from this. I'm like, how much worse can the FBI look? And the problem is like I'm not surprised by it at all. Like I actually predicted this was probably the reason for this. Like I feel like there was an obvious reason why none of the other interviews of Danchenko came out, and now we know. But um, it's ridiculous. But I'm kind of glad it came out like right now when the FBI is just looking terrible and it's just like pouring it on him again. Um, but I guess we have enough people in here to get started um, officially. So Hans, you want to go through what happened today, or I mean, I can, or whoever wants to. MB,
Sure, we can do that.
why don't you
So
go
what
through it?
happened today? Sure. I mean, I'll keep it short. I mean, we don't want to get into all the legal stuff, and there's a lot in there. But what happened today is that Durham filed a motion in limine, which is kind of legal speak. The American legal system uses all these antiquated terms, which are, you know, really not necessary. Anyway, what it means is that before it's very routine, it's totally normal, and it's about time that he does it because next month they're going to go to trial, Durham versus Danchenko. Anyway, so it's a routine filing where you just kind of argue over what kind of evidence you want to introduce, and then the judge gets to decide whether you can or cannot introduce it. So it's all, very standard. But in sort of typical Durham style, he made sure he dropped a couple of absolute bombshells. And you'd already mentioned the biggest one by far, which is that Danchenko was a confidential human source for the FBI. That means he was on the FBI's payroll from March of 2017 to October of 2020. I mean, I fell off my tree when I saw that. We had suspected it. You came up, in fact, you were the one who came up with it. I found an early tweet of yours from 2020 when you said that they probably did that. I know we discussed it at the time, also offline, and your theory was that um, they'd only given us one interview, heavily redacted, from January of 2017, interview with Danchenko, and all these other interviews somehow we didn't get to see. And you had sort of quite rightly speculated at the time that the reason that these are not available is because his status changed. So once you become a confidential human source, you're basically taken off grid. It's like you don't exist. And if anyone asks you, they just say sources and methods, can't say anything, sorry. And so you had quite rightly predicted that. And today we found out that that's actually true. They did actually do that. And the reason why it's such a huge, huge, huge deal is because they did that in March of 2017, which was a few weeks after they found out that the whole dossier was a big fat lie. Danchenko had disavowed the dossier. He said it was just based on like just gossip from his friends in Perm and stuff like that. Completely, just the whole thing had fallen apart. So there was absolutely no value in making him a CHS, confidential human source. There was just nothing there. He had zero investigative value of any kind. So the only reason he was basically a liar who lied about the dossier, lied about his sources, everything had fallen apart. They should have shut the investigation. So the only reason why they would make him a CHS at that time is the reason that you fool, mentioned 2 years ago, which is to get him off the grid. He's such bad news for the FBI. He basically, made the whole dossier collapse. The whole thing came to an end January of 2017. They needed to undo that. They needed to rewind the clock, just get this guy off the grid. And the way to do that is to make him a CHS. So, probably one of the worst things that you could ever do. It's so completely dishonest by FBI leadership to do that. Just everything we've heard from them over the past few years, this one in many ways kind of tops it. It's absolutely unbelievable what they did there. And I think the thing that even you probably were surprised, Fool, was that how long it carried on for. Is that right? I mean, it carried on.
No, exactly.
Until
Exactly. All the way through the Trump presidency and completely after the Horowitz report, which completely destroyed the integrity and the of the FBI plus Danchenko. And still, even after that, a year after the Horowitz reports come out, he's still a CHS, which is unexplainable because Mueller's done and everything else. So I really can't even explain why the hell that would even happen. But even before that, what is it like when you look at it right now? When you think about Igor Danchenko, the main thing that the FBI got from him, which contributed to Crossfire Hurricane, was that he had a source, Sergei Milyan, that talked to him for 10 to 15 minutes, and that gave him everything. That Trump was colluding with Russia to release stuff to WikiLeaks, and it's to me it's like the FBI is looking like they hit a home run in March 2017. They're basically hiring Miss Cleo, the Milyan whisperer. He can just get a random phone call at any time from any Russian source at any time. It's just the most ridiculous thing ever. And like you're saying, that it went from all the way through Mueller, all the way through that. It's what else could have been happening? And how in the hell did he not get shut down? I don't know if Horowitz had access to it. I mean, the main, we were talking about, the main giveaway was that Horowitz was talking very in depth about his interviews in January, where we know Auten was there, we know Soma was there, we know Loftman and his deputy was there. But then the rest of them were there was just a Washington field office agent in March 2017, May 2017. And we don't know anything about those, very little about those interviews, but it's an absolute travesty. And I just lost my train of thought there, but it's I don't understand how Barr got a hold of this and still didn't even shut him down. I mean, maybe once he like a lot of people are saying, once Durham was made a special counsel, that's when all of a sudden he was kicked out. But we know, was it September when he released the Igor Danchenko report, where we found out that he was potentially going to be a subject of a FISA warrant and things like that. When at that point they were saying that Igor Danchenko left the country, but now in this, what we found out today is he didn't even leave. So I find it incredible where Igor Danchenko went from being potential target of a FISA investigation or a FISA warrant to being the source of a FISA warrant against a political opponent of we'll call it the regime. Hans, you want to comment on that? Let me see. We got a request.
Yeah, no, no, because you're absolutely right. I completely agree with all of that. And we haven't mentioned a number of other, pretty massive revelations in today's filing, which each on their own, if they had just been sort of come out on their own, would have been huge. But I think everything is sort of overshadowed by this this revelation that he was a confidential human source for 4 years, basically throughout the whole Trump presidency. It's completely. I'm still flabbergasted. I mean, it's been a few hours, but I still have to kind of get my thoughts straight as to what all the implications are. I mean, it's like a giant avalanche that will have a lot of knock-on effects. But the end point here is that the FBI's leadership. We're talking about Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Outen, those kinds of people, are absolute and total crooks. This is like just one of the worst. They've done so many bad things, but this is one of the worst, maybe the worst thing they've done out of all the things they've done. So, if I know we're talking about Danchenko, this is about Danchenko's trial and so on, but I kind of feel that even if Danchenko is convicted, that's pretty meaningless unless you get those other guys, the ones I just listed. You need to go after those guys.
Yeah,
the good news
and people.
is that let me just finish this point. The good news is that unlike, I guess, when we had our last spaces and when we were all worried that all the statute of limitations had expired, which they had, the 5-year statute of limitations, that clock has now been reset because the FBI was paying this guy until October of 2020. So the conspiracy basically went on until that time at least. And so the clock started ticking again. And, now we've got plenty of time to do something about these people. Well, Durham does. We don't know whether he will. But I just feel after today, like he has to. It's just, this is too much, too big to just kind of walk away from.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to kick it to Ship to get the legal analysis. But, to me, everybody always comes to me and they're like, why can't Durham go after the FBI? And it's like, when stuff like this comes out, it's like, if you go after the FBI, right now, the Danchenko case is done. That's Danchenko's complete out. It seems like that's what, Sussman was. The FBI was completely, completely compromised, just like in this case as well. So it's like Durham can't go after them because he's trying to prove this case against Danchenko, and if he says these are all crooks, then Danchenko wins. But I'm going to head to Ship and see what his analysis is. What's up, Ship?
Hey, a couple.
It's been a while.
Yeah, well, I've been in trial until today.
Yeah. Good work, by the way.
Thank you. Couple things. One, the Mueller SCO. Oh, okay. A couple things. I know what happened to Danchenko once they made him a CHS. They buried him over on the CI side because remember who Danchenko is. He's got connections to Russian intelligence officers in the U.S. He had been identified as having had contact with Russian intelligence officers back in 2010. So after he essentially is made a CHS, which is just unfathomable because you don't need to pay him. He's got his own problems that he needs to work off. He goes with the CI side of the Bureau. He's no longer doing anything on Crossfire Hurricane because he's worthless. And so remember that footnote in Mueller's report about that cadre of FBI agents who were working co-located with a special counsel, but on other projects that spun out of the special counsel's work. That's what this kind of thing is about. As the special counsel's work generated counterintelligence information, and Danchenko might have been valuable for counterintelligence purposes because of what he might have been able to say about Russian intelligence efforts in the U.S. Might have been worthless, but it might have had some value. So the FBI is going to explore that. Now they bury him as a paid CHS because then he goes into Sentinel, and his file is off limits. Sentinel is a separate intranet-based database with highly restrictive access of all confidential human sources for purposes of maintaining their anonymity and confidentiality. Agents around the country don't just have willy-nilly access to Sentinel and can look up anybody they want. They have to be given access to specific files of specific informants in Sentinel, and one agent sitting on one side of a squad and another agent sitting on another side of the squad don't necessarily know about each other's confidential human sources. Because the more people that know, the more likelihood there is that the confidentiality is going to be blown. So that information is close hold. It is not disseminated. It's not widely circulated, and the database itself is not accessible. So once Danchenko goes in there, everything about Danchenko is now walled off from most of the Bureau. But putting Danchenko in there is an exercise, because what I want to know is who was the agent that signed him up and who approved it, even after they knew, what they knew about him in December of 2016 and January 2017. And I mean, I can see a justification being made about, hey, this guy's got great potential as a double agent. This guy's got great potential for us to use to send misinformation back at the Russians and to give us information on Russian intelligence, and we've got him over a barrel. But to put him in Sentinel as a confidential human source, that's a questionable proposition, and I guarantee you that was signed off on very high in the chain of command.
Well, this reminds me of in March 2017, that's when they had that meeting with Dana Buente, and they basically sort of restarted the whole they sort of restarted the whole Alpha Bank. Not really restarted it, but briefed him on the Alpha Bank situation and the CH, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and they made it seem like it was a bigger deal than it was. And all of a sudden, Danchenko's made CHS again. But who would actually approve of Danchenko? What level would approve of Danchenko to be a CHS?
It would only take a squad supervisor signature and an ASAC signature. So an agent, a working squad agent, but this would be on the CI side, meaning it would be on the counterintelligence side, not on the criminal side. Wouldn't be. Well,
which would be Crossfire Hurricane.
Well, the Crossfire Hurricane was a hybrid, but it was actually Crossfire Hurricane was operating more as a criminal investigation than an intelligence investigation. But it had components of both. So it could have been a Crossfire Hurricane agent, but I'm going to guess that he wasn't made. We don't know the month, but I'm going to guess it didn't happen until after the Mueller Group took over. And I'm going to guess that the Mueller Group looked at it and said, all right, this guy's a problem, because we know he's a problem on the Steele. And I've said many times before, the Mueller Group never embraced the Steele dossier. They never used it for any reasons. They got away.
But it's March 2017.
Well, I know, and the Mueller Group came in May 2017. But when did Danchenko actually get signed up?
Well, didn't it say it was March 2017?
I didn't think there was a month associated with that.
No, it's March
2017 to 2020.
No, it's March 2017 to October 2020. So this is pre-Mueller, so it has to be, and we basically know that Crossfire Hurricane was still running then. So
well, if it's March 2017, then that means Comey did it.
Yeah. Okay.
Comey was, he had his finger in the, he had his arm up to his elbow in it by late March, because of all the conversations with Trump that he said made him uncomfortable, and then he goes before Congress on I think on March 27th and says the FBI is investigating connections between the Trump campaign. So at that point, Comey was fully briefed on everything, and he would have signed off on taking Danchenko out of the line of fire and hiding him in Sentinel.
Ship, I have a quick question on that, if you don't mind. So it sounds like Sentinel's pretty effectively siloing that information, but if there's a regular case agent or a line agent out there that wants to look up Igor Danchenko and see what the FBI has on him, is there any indication that they would have that he would be a confidential human source?
Nope. That's in that would be in Sentinel. They could run NCIC on him. They get a rap sheet on him. They got an open source database information on him, but Sentinel information will not come up.
At that point, he would get a code name or something, right? So then it would be tucked under there, or not.
I'm not exactly sure how. I think Sentinel is actually run on numeric identifiers.
Got it.
So
maybe I can see if I can get 279er in here, because he's a ex FBI agent. and he wants to speak. 279, are you there? Hello, hello. Good to see you, Ryan, by the way, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, baby. Maybe I'll move to King. He had a good thread today. King, what's your take? Oh, he's unmuted.
Oh, here I am.
Oh, there he is.
I'm with Ship. I think this was, as I put in my thread, this was an effort to bury Danchenko. I wonder whether somebody came up with a bright idea. Hey, we had this structured with Steele as our confidential source, but we had to drop him. Then we tried to backdoor him, and that's got problems. We need somebody else. Let's take number 2, which is Danchenko. But making him a confidential source and paying him, given his testimony, is very problematic. And somebody at some level has to see that. That's why he stayed buried so long.
Yeah, and I mean, I might as well do this now. I mean, I've discussed this a couple times on Twitter, but I'll sneak in another one of sort of my hypotheses that goes back to 2015. There's like if you go to the Steele debriefing, like the 302, that when he was interviewed in September 2017, on the first page, there's a payment sheet, and it's about one of his subsources getting paid for finding a source in Germany that had knowledge of basically biological weapons in Russia. And it kind of mirrors, I mean, this is kind of in the weeds, but it kind of mirrors the later comments by Steele that the NSA was in talks with this source named Victor Bittner, who was involved with trying to get back the shadow brokers' stolen NSA cyber tools from whoever took them. And my hypothesis has been that during like the early 2017, when the shadow brokers came out and the NSA tools released, they're trying to get him back, and they used this dude, Victor Bittner, to try to get him back from whoever the hell stole him. And that time period was when he came in. It was March 2, 2017, and for some reason, Steele knew about this dude. And my guess is that since all of this stuff, like that was regarding like the shadow brokers and the NSA tools, was the same thing. It was happening in Germany. So my guess is that these are sort of overlaps, and potentially Danchenko was the source in 2015, and he was using the same source to try to get the information about bioweapons, Russian bioweapons, and he was using the same source, Victor Bittner, or somebody related to him, to get these NSA cyber tools back. So that's kind of been my hypothesis, and that's why it would make sense to me if it went all the way to 2020, because they were trying to, because Crossfire Hurricane was dead, Mueller was dead, so I don't know why the hell it would go all the way till then, but they were still trying to get back those tools, or at least sort of investigate that. That's like a sidebar. I just wanted to put that in. But I know me and King have talked about that before. So I think that could potentially be a reason why he was actually made a CHS on a completely different subject, because it doesn't say what the subject is for this. But I know they were interviewing him about the election-related material, but it could be something completely separate. There's evidence for that.
Can I disagree with all you guys? Because I think we pretty much know why they did that. And that has to do with Nunes and his investigation. Nunes was ramping up his investigation in March of 2017. And he had uncovered, for instance, the spying on Trump. And you all remember how in March of 2017, Nunes went to the White House to inform Trump that he had been spied on. And then, Democrats, media, all kind of ganged up against him. Then he had to step back, and there was ethics investigations and so on. But he was the first to really figure out that something's fishy with all this Russia stuff. He was the one leading the investigation, and the timeline fits. And he went to the White House to inform Trump. And I think they just wanted to. They just at that point, Comey had just announced that they were investigating the Trump campaign. They had lied to the DOJ earlier in March. I mean, a lot of things going on that Comey was running in March in terms of ramping up the investigation, and they couldn't have this guy Nunes fishing around and finding out about this guy Danchenko. So I'm as sure as I can be that that's why they just pulled the plug at that time. Like, okay, we got to get this guy off the grid.
That also makes sense because like there must have been tons of people in the government that actually knew who this person was, and I pretty much know that. But it was always interesting to me that the name never came out or anything like that. And now that he's a CHS, that makes sense why that never actually happened until our boy outed him in 2020, which was awesome.
I have a quick question for Ship, probably. Would Horowitz have access to the Sentinel system? I guess that's my question. Did Horowitz potentially not know about this, or what are the options?
Generally, no. It's a very closely held system. Horowitz might have asked for information. They might have given him what they were willing to give him, but he really doesn't have the kind of leverage to demand access to that kind of material. Just like during the Obama administration, Sally Yates cut him off from the ability to supervise the National Security Division on the basis that the classified material regularly handled in the National Security Division was outside the scope of responsibility of the Inspector General, which kept him away from what's a 702? Was it that section 702 inquiry information?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd add that in the Horowitz report, he does not go into that issue at all, whereas he did with Steele. Steele being terminated as a CHS, et cetera, and going to the reliability of the Steele report, he did not mention one way or the other about the footnotes that he wrote with the revelations that came from Danchenko in comparison with what they were telling the court.
So here's a question. When you open a CHS, is that under a specific investigation? Because obviously in the Horowitz report, you had 3 sources they talk about, confidential human sources. And Horowitz talks about a bunch of CHSs that were sort of involved in Crossfire Hurricane, but he doesn't talk about Igor Danchenko or as a CHS. So do you open a CHS underneath a specific investigation, because it could be separate?
I only know this information secondhand, so I would defer to any FBI agent or retired FBI agent who's out there involved on this.
Maybe
to step up.
Maybe 279. Are you there, buddy?
Generally, a source is not opened on a specific investigation. They're just opened as a source on the basis that they, have access to or can provide information on a particular subject or program. And then,
got it.
As they provide something that is pertinent to a particular file, it gets indexed to that file, and the case agent on that file gets a little heads up that there's new information in the file, but that case agent doesn't necessarily know the identity of the source. He just knows that a source with an ID number provided information relevant to his file.
I have a question about CHSs, which again might be too deep in the weeds, but how often are they reevaluated? Because Danchenko was CHS for 2.5, almost 3 years. I assume at some point, you're paying him money. There's going to be some audit of, is this guy still providing information? So how often does that happen, and what needs to be produced in order to continue as an active source?
Source reports are due every 90 days, and every 90 days, the case agent, the handler, has to report to the squad supervisor what the source has done in the past 90 days and justify keeping the source open. A source that doesn't do anything productive for 90 days is subject to being closed, but then they can be immediately reopened if on day 92 they provide something. So it's it's a door that swings both ways pretty easily, and it's just to encourage agents to remain in direct contact with their open sources, and if they're not in contact with their open sources, then close them out.
So he was re-upped multiple times, and theoretically he'd have to be producing something. And I guess that's going to be a big question down the road: is what is he delivering that is keeping him in good graces? Because Comey was long gone. This is, most people. This must be a ton of people that have changed hands with this guy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that this clearly made its way up to Ray, but you still, as has been pointed out a couple of different ways, it's very, very likely that whatever information he was providing as a source went far beyond the information that he'd given Steele and Crossfire Hurricane. I mean, he's just in a position, being a Russian national with past contacts with Russian intelligence, he's just in a position to give information on a continual basis. It doesn't necessarily have to be productive information. That's not what intelligence gathering is. Intelligence gathering isn't about building some case going some direction. It's just about a flow of information. So if he's just able to say, I'm talking to people at home, I have a friend who tells me this, that's the kind, just that on the CI side, a source is just about continuing to bring information in the door. The agents will worry about whether it's valuable or not valuable.
Well, for Steele, Danchenko is one of his biggest sources for Ukraine-related stuff, so I could see him being useful in quotation marks for whatever is going on with Ukraine during that time period. But I see the great Lee Smith has joined the chat. Lee, how's it going?
Greetings. How are you guys?
Doing fantastic.
Thanks for. I asked a question before. I just sort of broadcast it to the different lawyers, and I think that Ship kind of answered my question with what he just said, which is, I'm just curious to know how Durham plays this, and if he will continue. After the Sussman case, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but it looked like he's basically. I thought it was a strategic use, first of all, of the FBI as patsy to go after Sussman, but I'm not sure about that anymore, and I didn't know how he resolves the issue that the FBI had both opened a counterintelligence investigation on Danchenko and then turned around and used him as a confidential human source. But I think Ship explained that to my benefit, even though that wasn't the question he was answering. But I guess the more general question I'd have is Durham going to turn on the FBI at this point, or is he just going to limit his sights to Danchenko? And so that's a question for everyone who has kindly joined us tonight.
Well, let me add one thing, Lee. Nice to hear your voice again. Let me add one thing here, and this is a comment I made months ago.
By the way, Ship, before I forget, congratulations on the case today. I was very happy. I know a lot of other people are very happy, and man, it's just great fighting the good fight on behalf of people. So congrats on that. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that before I forget and before we get caught up with all sorts of other stuff. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. One thing I want to mention about, and I said this about a year ago, I think, when the Danchenko indictment, or maybe it was the Sussman indictment, first came down. I do this good-naturedly. I chided this group about second guessing where Durham is and not giving him credit for being miles ahead where we are. He knows so much more than we know. And today's another example of that. He's known this information for a long time, but he kept it to himself. He's making strategic use of it. Who ever heard of Charles Dolan before 6 months ago? Nobody. Or 8 months ago, when Dolan's name popped up. There's a lot of people have done a lot of digging on the Alpha Bank thing. So a lot of congratulations goes around to a lot of people for that. But you've got to kind of still take a step back and say, you know what? Durham knows a lot more about this stuff than any of us because he's got a lot more tools available to him, and it's all he does every day.
Well, yeah, Ship. I remember you coming on one of my spaces and telling us about. I don't know how you phrased it, but you're saying that you needed to go after the FBI people. You need to like sort of clear out the people that were within that investigation. I can't remember how you actually phrased it, but I remember you coming in there and saying something like that because like Lee's saying like I was saying before is I mean to actually prosecute Danchenko, you can't freaking bury the FBI first, but I remember you talking about that.
Yeah,
Well,
but if Durham is so
say
on top of everything, why didn't he charge Danchenko with all these additional lies? I mean, the other thing that came out of today's filing is that it's replete with references to, oh, an uncharged lie here, an uncharged false statement there. So he's now put all these uncharged false statements in there. So why the hell didn't he charge Danchenko with them in the first place? And, you know, one of them is huge. One of them is absolutely huge. It's the P-tape story. So Danchenko claimed the P-tape story came from this hotel manager in Moscow. Well, guess what? Durham has that manager. He's a witness. He's going to testify next month. He's going to testify that he never spoke to Danchenko. There was no P-tape story. This is all bullshit. So, I mean, that would have been a pretty important one to kind of have in court and disprove once and for all.
Well, Hans, like, I mean,
but the question is,
like the biggest thing on the planet.
But did he lie to the FBI about that? Or
no. Well, Ship. The problem is like even in the indictment, they have like a bunch of unindicted lies to the FBI from the January 27 interview, which because it was in the jurisdiction of D.C., which I think that's what a lot of it is because he wanted to charge him in Virginia. But I mean, he even has like those uncharged lies in the indictment, which I think that's pretty much probably what it was, which is probably strategic, but Hans is right that he definitely didn't charge him for that. But I mean, see what happened with Sussman. He's probably right about that.
Yeah, it becomes cumulative after a while. I mean, you could charge 20 false statements, you could charge 50 false statements. At some point, you just stop. You know, and he chose 5 or 6, and he chose 5 or 6 he was confident in being able to prove.
Ship, if I can just say that your insight, is absolutely right. A year ago, saying that Durham knows a lot more than all of us because he has the resources to get to it, and he has the clearances and everything. The question is not how much Durham knows. The question is, will Durham act on what we all know, which is that the FBI played an active role in this operation. And what I'm looking at is this filing tonight, and I'm trying to understand this filing and reading and saying, like, I don't know, I can't tell. It looks to me like it's pretty obvious that the FBI is in on it. Will Durham act on this or not? How long can he avoid acting on this? That's my question, right? Not how much Durham knows, but will he act on what everyone in this room right now knows?
Well, remember, Durham doesn't have complete autonomy to make that call. That has to be approved by Merrick Garland. So it may be that he wants to, and he hasn't gotten clearance to yet. It may be that he's decided that's, more of a matter for a report to Congress and, congressional response to FBI misconduct. I just don't know. Nobody knows. But I don't think we can assume anything yet from what he hasn't done. And Hans made an extraordinarily insightful comment that I hadn't thought about, which was, how does this extend the statute of limitations for at least a few players that might have been involved in trying to bury Danchenko to cover up the fraud, to the extent you could classify it as a fraud. And so I hadn't thought about that. Does this extend the statute of limitations because under federal criminal law, actions to hide the existence of a conspiracy are overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy, and the statute of limitations on a conspiracy doesn't begin to run until the final overt act. So I don't know how much. I don't know what what Durham might do, we go back 3 years, and what Durham might or might not do was a mystery then. It's still a mystery.
If I may, in answer to Lee's question, we have been wondering for some time about how Durham was going to handle the materiality issue in the Danchenko case, in contrast to what happened to him in Sussman. You recall in Sussman, the defense put on a fairly powerful case that the FBI didn't care what Sussman said one way or the other. They were going to do this investigation their way, and it was going to go on for a long time, no matter what Sussman told them his client was. Danchenko case presents that multiplied by maybe 10, because you've got Danchenko telling the FBI that the whole predicate, the basic probable cause that they had found so far was bullshit. It was a made up story using a fake conversation with Millian from the get go. That was the basis of where the FBI was heading, and instead he told the FBI that it was all bar talk and rumors and drunk school chums getting together over drinks and swapping stories. That was the Steele dossier. When that comes out in the Danchenko case by the defense, Durham's got a problem, because he's got to convince the jury that this really mattered to the FBI, whatever Danchenko said. And Durham told us today how he's going to try to sidestep that. He says he will argue that it has to do with the potential Russian agent investigation or counterintelligence investigation that Danchenko was a target of back in 2010, 11, 12, that went away. But Danchenko, in lying to them about his sources, if he had told the truth, that would have, I guess, lights would have come on over the FBI's heads, and they would have gone back to see whether Russia was involved in this from the beginning. It implies almost, if you go back and read his brief, Durham's brief, it doesn't say, but it implies that the jury could well be asked to infer that the Russians were behind all of this. And that's why it was material. I'll turn it over to everybody else for comment, but that jumped out at me.
Interesting, and I don't even think, like, to me that's like the weak part of that whole thing. Like, I feel like Durham, like, I don't know if Ship or King, you want to comment on this. Like, shouldn't Durham have had Sergey like locked in for his testimony before he did this entire indictment? I mean, obviously he definitely lied about Dolan and some of the other lies, but it seems to me like Durham definitely wanted Sergey to be his star witness about this, but he didn't even lock him in before any of this. So, I mean, even like, obviously a lot of people don't like reading what Marcy Wheeler has to say, but some of her stuff about Durham's weakness over Sergey's testimony and sort of it being circumstantial evidence, I think kind of is spot on. But what do you guys think about that as prosecutors?
Well, I will have to confess I haven't followed that line of debate very closely over the last couple of weeks since I've been at trial. I just saw this popped up today, And so I was aware of Technofog, who was in here earlier. I don't know, did he disappear? He never speaks up.
He looks like he
Um,
disappeared.
so I'm not sure what that line of analysis. I saw that Sergey is now out of the country. I saw Durham's representation that he cannot attest or assure the court that Sergey is going to be willing to come into the U.S. to testify. He may be trying to lay the groundwork to use his testimony or use his statements on the basis that a witness is unavailable, which I guess it's 804. I don't know what all the exceptions are there. I doubt he'll get very far on that, but who knows? He might. But I mean, I understand Sergey's point. I've seen him say, on Twitter that he wants the U.S. Marshal Service to provide him protection. Well, Durham doesn't really have that option. Durham can't dictate to federal agencies who comes in and provides witness security. I mean, it's an FBI case. Durham's being supported by the FBI, and that's who he has to offer Sergey. And Sergey doesn't trust the FBI, which and he wants to make sure he's not going to get arrested or charged with something. I don't know exactly what his concern is there, but he says he has that concern. So when you have an unavailable witness, you try to figure out a way to prosecute your case even without the witness, and if it can't be done, you drop the counts and rely on the witness.
What he's doing is he starts with the two Danchenko emails to Sergey that this group got Sergey to hand over, which I think we were the first ones to figure out that Sergey had been framed, and it was based on those two emails, and that's where Durham is going to go. He's going to show the July 21st email, and then the August. I keep forgetting the date, August 18th or something email. Both of which, without saying so explicitly, certainly strongly imply that the two have never met nor spoken. And Danchenko is still trying to reach out to Milian to arrange a meeting or something. And so he starts with those two. He has some emails from Milian not to Sergey, not to Danchenko,
Right,
but
to a third party.
To third parties. And he's trying to use those to buttress that theory. And he's arguing that even if they're held to be hearsay, they should come in under exceptions, including that the witness is not available, etc. I have not got into the books on that. My seat in my pants tells me he has a hill to climb on that, but he could get them in. They're not slam dunk. They don't say precisely that they've never met or talked. And so he's got a tough case on that. He'd be a whole lot better off if he had Milian here to testify.
No, I agree. And off the top, I know that 804 that 803 has like 23 exceptions to the hearsay rule, but 804, for which specifically is for when a witness is not available, there's far fewer exceptions to hearsay rule, and I don't know if those emails would fit under any of the 804 exceptions or not.
I was just going to say, I noticed that part in the filing where they quoted Sergey saying that, or what was an indirect quote, that Sergey is concerned about the FBI. I thought that was interesting comment on the filing, and important and true.
Yeah, I mean, Sergey wouldn't be the first reluctant witness who just didn't want to come back to the U.S. for whatever reason, that he's more comfortable where he's at, and I'm not saying that's true, but if it was true, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, does he have any obligation to come back from wherever he is in order to make Durham's case for Durham? And the answer to that question is no. And he's been beat up pretty badly in the court of public opinion as well as the court of law on this whole issue since it arose years ago. And this is not necessarily his opportunity to vindicate himself. So why should he go to steps that he's not comfortable taking in order to make Durham's case easier?
My problem was that Durham tried to make this case sort of cookie cutting around Sergey without, like, he never went to Sergey to try to prove his case, and now he's trying to bring him in. Like, why would Sergey feel obligated to do that? Which I feel like Durham should have sort of had him nailed down as a witness before, but
I don't think it would have made any difference. The rubber was always going to hit the road when the trial subpoena came.
Right, but I mean, still, if I'm Sergey, I'd be like, why the hell would I want to do that? Like, if you look at Mueller, like, every single person with a Russian last name that was involved with anything, whether it's Kalimnik, Butina, Veselnitskaya, they all freaking got indicted for basically nonsense. So Sergey, I think, is kind of smart to not even get involved, in my opinion, but he can do what he wants.
Well, yeah, because he's not dealing with the Trump Justice Department now. Even though he's dealing with Durham, it's still a Biden Justice Department. So there's no warm and fuzzy feeling for him there with the Biden Justice Department. So why should he step foot in the U.S.?
The other big problem is the other key witness here is Christopher Steele, and he's not going to be available either. So he's got two hills to climb. If you want, there's a lot of emails, there's a lot of communications they want from Steele that is also in this that they're trying to get in.
That's true. And I mean, on the same line, Durham in this filing mentions that Danchenko was suggesting to his previous employer that they could just make up source information or sources to make their reports more credible, which actually sort of, I feel like, applies to Chris Steele's reports, which I don't know if anybody wants to get into, but it seems from this filing that Danchenko might be a bigger liar than Steele. And if he was saying the same stuff he was saying to Shank Cedar, like, hey, just if you don't have like a good source, just like make it up. I could have seen Steele just running with that, which, I mean, puts Steele in legal jeopardy if he was telling that to the FBI, but it makes Danchenko look like the bigger liar than Steele, which I don't know if anybody wants to comment about that, but that's kind of what it made it look like, that at least that's where Durham's going. I'm not sure if that's absolutely true, but it made Danchenko look like the bigger fibber.
I think Danchenko is, without question, maybe the biggest liar in this whole thing. It just, I don't want to get too deep into, cultural smears, but when you grow up in certain kind of cultural realities, you say what you think you need to say to get you through the moment, and that's true in Russia. And you adjust as you go on to try to make the lies fit. Eventually, they don't fit, and you just persevere. So there's no question in my mind that Danchenko has told whoppers throughout this entire episode, just based on whatever he thought served him in the moment.
I agree with that, with one qualification. You go back to the skip the P-tape part and the Dolan lie that is alleged, but go to the original Sergey Millian as a source lie. That smacks of being cooked up by more than one person. You had Nellie Orr investigating open source Millian for days or weeks before that happened. Somehow Danchenko got the word that Millian's your guy, and that became the line.
Ship, if these whoppers are so preposterous, who in their right mind could possibly believe them, especially the people who are responsible for American national security. I agree with you. They're absurd. How do we have top men at the FBI believing this and then opening an investigation on a presidential campaign, keeping it open through a transitional period, and then a White House? I agree. It's total bullshit. 100% bullshit. How did the FBI fall for it?
Because
It's just bullshit.
Because the necessary, what's the term for what's the term for necessary components of a nuclear reaction? The necessary critical mass of people with decision-making authority wanted it to be true. They wanted there to be evidence that Donald Trump had unsavory and unsustainable relationships with Russian actors, malign Russian interests. It was. I've said this one. It's like Brian Auten's like the guy shoveling, a pile of horse shit, knowing that there's a pony at the bottom.
Here's the case that I've made before, which I still think is reasonable, and maybe some people think it's bullshit, which is fine. But I grew up in New York City, and so I've had Donald Trump's voice ringing in my ears since the mid '70s. And here are the few things that I know about Donald Trump: that he worked in two of the most mobbed up businesses in American society, and that's casinos and that's real estate as it's related to construction. And for me, it's entirely implausible that the FBI and the New York Police Department and the New York City press, including the Times, when it was a real newspaper, the New York Daily News, and the New York Post, I know because I worked at the Village Voice, where I was a colleague of the guy who wrote the first biography of Donald Trump. And I know everything they said about Donald Trump. And I'd like to believe that all of these people for 30 years weren't so incompetent that they would have missed something this big, that Donald Trump was actually a Russian agent. So to me, it is not plausible that they wanted to believe this. To me, and again, I know I'm closing off all sorts of options here, but to me, it's just a total fraud. That's it.
Well, I wouldn't dismiss that as the possibility, but I think that the origins of the suspicions about Trump come, post-Soviet breakup. They're about, Trump being
only Jonathan Chait has ever reported this, who's a moron, who's one of the stupidest people in American public life.
This was always Glenn Simpson's big hobby horse, was Donald Trump and oligarchs. And when he was at the Wall Street Journal, he chased this theory for years that Donald Trump's business empire was financed by dirty Russian money. And that he was beholden to Russian oligarchs, and that he laundered money for them.
And Glenn Simpson is the guy who had this again. There was no one at the FBI who looked at this. There was no one in the New York City Police Department who looked at this. There was no one in New Jersey law enforcement where Trump had his casinos who looked at this. It was only Glenn Simpson. I'm sorry, that just lends more evidence to my case. If a retard like Glenn Simpson is the guy making that case, the case never existed.
Have you met many senior officials in the FBI?
I mean, I don't necessarily believe that they're geniuses, but I mean, again, to me, it beggars belief that all these different people that say, yeah, it sounds plausible. If Glenn Simpson says so, Glenn's a pretty bright guy. All of the boys at the Journal tell us that Glenn is one of the shining lights over there. So if he says this, I mean, Glenn is a genius.
Here's a reality of the FBI staffing, is that nobody's in a position long enough to really become an expert, if anything. Even on the counterintelligence side, those guys move from job to job every 3 or 4 years.
But there are no files saying, like, look, guys, fellas, we've been looking at Donald Trump since when he opened up the Taj Mahal. Even before that, we looked at his father. We looked at Fred Trump because, there were a lot of weird people living in some of these houses. So I know what Glenn Simpson has in his reports, but it's not true because we have the documents here. Like, I just came onto the Bureau. I just came onto NYPD 3 years ago, but I looked at the reports. We have files. that's what I'm saying. It's none of it it doesn't make sense in that way. There is no. I mean, look, it might just be one of the most bizarre screw ups in human history. That's the
Well,
only way to explain it, as a bizarre screw up.
well, yes, but every new set of personnel that come through a given office, and this would be the Russian section of the counterintelligence division, they think they're going to find what has been missed by the people before them. Everybody thinks they're going to crack it. That they're going to uncover what was hidden to those that came before them.
And it's Glenn Simpson and Christopher Steele who have
No, it's Brian Otten and people in the Russian, counterintelligence section on the Russian.
I know they think they'll find it, but the people who are providing it, it's Glenn Simpson and Christopher Steele. Those are or Igor Danchenko.
Well,
but again, that comes back to my original question about Danchenko. If the FBI opened up a counterintelligence investigation, I'm like, wait a second, I don't know, this is weird. Danchenko, we have a record of this guy, don't we? We do. We opened up an investigation in 2010. So wait, I don't know, we're taking him seriously now? Not really, but he's providing some information, except these other guys are telling us at the Bureau that he lied. He lied 100% all through every interview he gave. He lied, and we know he lied. So why are we taking him seriously on anything? I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll say the same thing that I've said previously about that interview. And this was given to me by a very senior retired FBI agent who spent almost his entire career on the counterintelligence division. The interview of Danchenko was not to evaluate Danchenko's truthfulness or untruthfulness. The interview of Danchenko was to evaluate whether Danchenko had actually said the things to Christopher Steele that Christopher Steele reported to the FBI. In other words, did Christopher Steele make shit up, or did Christopher Steele accurately report what Danchenko had told him without regard to whether or not Danchenko's information was true or false? And in most respects, Danchenko said, well, yeah, he embellished here, he embellished there, this really wasn't sourced that well, it was bar talk, and in a couple of instances he said, no, I didn't say that. Okay, the purpose of doing that was Steele was their source that they relied upon. If it had turned out that Steele had lied to them as opposed to simply passing on bad information, they would have had to take that to the FISA court. They don't have to go to the FISA court if it only turns out that Steele was truthful, but his information was bad.
I totally agree with you. That January interview, which is the only one we've seen, we haven't seen all of March or May or the others. I totally agree with you. That interview was to corroborate what Steele had told
Exactly.
I totally agree. 100% corroborating.
And Brian Otten came out of there singing his praises, saying Steele's good.
Right.
Steele's good.
But any analyst, I mean, all of us saw it. It jumped out at us when we saw the January interview. There's it's a red flag, flashing red lights, and that is at that interview. Not only did Danchenko say he never met Millian, the source for the supposed source for memo number 95, at the end of July, but he had only talked to him one time, and it might have been him. He thought it was him because the guy never identified himself, and it lasted 10 to 15 minutes. If you go back and put the Steele memos in sequence, there are 4 of them that are all attributed to the same source, and it's impossible for that one call at the end of July to have been the source for all 4. So Danchenko's story doesn't match Steele's on the face of it. Nobody brought that up. Nobody asked Danchenko about that, and it's never really surfaced since then.
Yeah, I don't buy into this, incompetence thing at all. Maybe a couple of years ago, I might have given it some thought, but not after everything that we found out. I mean, you just added another bit there. The other part I would add to that is the media campaign that they're running. So something we haven't discussed yet is a few days after we, like Fool and HMM and Steve and so on, ID'd Danchenko, the New York Times, Savage and Goldman ran a hit piece against us. And they said, here's the headline: "The FBI pledged to keep a source anonymous, but Trump allies aided his unmasking." And then the whole thing is just an absolute hit piece. That's media strategy. That's someone at the FBI who's feeding these stenographers over at New York Times the narrative. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. Sure, they have a lot of dumb people, I have no doubt, but you cannot have so much stupidity to miss all these things and run a media strategy on top of that. I don't buy it.
Which I found crazy, like even like thinking about that time period that Danchenko was still an active CHS and that HMM like outed him then. And that he still remained active till October.
Right. When
It's
the
mind-boggling.
FBI ran this smear piece against us with the stenographers at New York Times, he was a CHS at the time. It's just unfathomable. I mean, and I'm so angry with these people over at New York Times. I mean, they keep doing it, but, when you're kind of personally affected, it just makes you even more angry. What a bunch of absolute lowlifes. Go on.
Guys,
Go on.
they flattered you. When garbage people like that attack you for doing good work, it's flattery. You guys did brilliant work. You guys should find a way to hang that as a trophy somewhere in your home. It was brilliant, not just the work you
Lee,
did,
that
article's
hanging up in my office actually.
Excellent. Find a way to turn it into a medallion and turn it into gold medals and give it to the guys who worked on that amazing thing. You guys did genius work. To hell with the Times. Of course, this is what these people do. The people at the Times and the Post, this is the garbage that they are. They're the outward face of the intelligence apparatus. They're disgusting. Hans, what you and the guys did was brilliant.
Which actually it makes a lot more sense now that like that's why they actually ran that hit piece, because he actually was like a CHS.
No, absolutely. I'm 100% sure. Now,
which like when the Jaffe stuff happened, it didn't seem like they were that pissed about it.
No, that's right. And no, that all made sense all of a sudden today when we found out. I went back to that article and I was like, oh my God, yeah, they only ran this because he was a CHS. Now, thanks, Lee, that's really kind. And, from that perspective, sure, you can take it as a compliment or whatever. But it is still very frustrating, and more than frustrating, to be honest, that there are these absolute total lowlifes, and they're the ones who have, the bully pulpit and the megaphone and, shouting out this stuff. And there's millions and millions of people who believe this crap. Absolute lowlifes.
No, look at all the people. Well, first of all, look at all the people in this room, and then look at all the people. Look at all the followers you have on Twitter, on Truth Social, the show that the show you've got on Epic. I mean, people are dying for this information. This is vital information, and people are starting to understand that the nasty garbage that is going on. It was in what was once our prestigious press corps. And I'm not just making a rhetorical case. It's really important. The work that's happening right here, the work that's being publicized, the work that people are getting to know. And people, this is vital to people's lives, vital to the decisions that people have to make on behalf of themselves and their families. So really, I'm not just blowing, hot air up your skirt. It's really important. And they do not control, they control a very small portion of the narrative for a nasty, ugly faction of American society. That's it.
And they might as well be employed by the FBI. I don't really understand. Like, they don't investigate. Like, Lee, you're an investigative journalist, like, and we try to be, I guess, but they're just another appendage of the intelligence community. Is disgusting. They don't actually report against the regime. They are part of it, and I don't know what to do about that, but that's the way it is.
They're reporting to their readership. They're writing from an angle that sells copies of the Times to people who read the Times.
Yep.
Yeah, only that didn't apply in the case of Danchenko. No one heard of him. No one reported what we did on Twitter, and this was a total non-event. And then out of nowhere comes Goldman and Savage with that smear piece, which they didn't need. I mean, their viewership didn't even know anything about it. None of the other newspapers had mentioned it, and it just came out. And as Fool said earlier, that was simply because he was CHS, and someone at FBI told those two stenographers, those absolute horrible people, to do that.
I know Cody Ave is here. I know he hasn't gotten to speak yet. And Ryan's here too. I don't know if he has any other comments there. Cody? Anything there? Ryan?
Yeah,
Ryan?
I might jump in for a couple
Yeah,
comments.
go for it.
I mean, so one thing that stuck out to me, thinking about it a little bit more tonight, Danchenko was not the only confidential human source that the FBI kept open, probably much longer than they should have. We know Rodney Joffe wasn't shut down until 2020. And we know there's a few other confidential human sources that brought the Alpha allegations to the FBI, and we don't know the statuses of those confidential human sources. But it seems to be a campaign to withhold information. I think, the point was made earlier, I thought brilliantly by King. It's no coincidence that Danchenko was made a confidential human source in March 2017 because Devin Nunes was out there. And people were going to start asking the question, who is Danchenko? Let us see the files on him. We want to see the sourcing on all this information. So I think it was a deliberate attempt to shield information from Congress, to shield information from scrutiny when they had that January interview already, which would have blown up the whole narrative. And that was their intention. Their intention was not to mine him for additional information or insights from Russia or anything else. They were hiding information, and that was their intention. And I am shocked, as everybody's noted, that Danchenko could possibly be kept open. While we saw Lindsey Graham in the Horowitz hearing, and he was going on for 40 minutes talking about, he's going to hold the FBI accountable, and you caught him, all this type of stuff. Well, Danchenko was still a paid confidential human source for another 10 months after that, which is just incredible. And as Lee was kind of posing the question earlier, I'm much more bullish than other sleuths. But for my part, I don't think there's any question whatsoever that Durham will be bringing some action against the FBI. And you look at all these different data points. We saw it in the Sussman trial, where line agents were coming out and saying, well, the FBI headquarters were telling us to keep this open. And how many times have we heard that in the course of this investigation? I mean, if we had like if we had a documentary and we had to go through everything that was wrong and everything that should have been a red flag, it would be like a 6-hour documentary of us just reading off all the different things that were wrong and everything that should have stopped the investigation. And then for this to come out today, there's no doubt in my mind anymore. I mean, there's really no case that there was anybody acting in good faith in the leadership level of the FBI. And I don't think Durham can let that go. I don't think there's any way Durham can produce a report knowing that there's more stuff coming, right? Because we have those footnotes, I think it's 223 and 461, that talk about McCabe shutting down a confidential human source or a former confidential human source with some interesting information. I thought, that stands out. We know Ivan Vorontsov, who is a subsource for Danchenko. He was interviewed no later than June 2017. I suspect whatever he told the FBI was really damning. And of course, we know now at that point, Danchenko was a paid confidential human source. So, where is that annotated in this file that Vorontsov blew up the whole narrative again? Or this 702 coverage that we got and all these insights about Galkina or Dolan or anything like that. I mean, there's really no good faith basis that you can assign to them making him a paid confidential human source. And it just blows my mind. I can't believe that they kept him open that long, and they were just hiding him. They were hiding him from FOIA. They were hiding him from Congress. And the only inference that I can make is that it was a criminal attempt to obstruct justice and to obstruct Congress. Sorry, rambled a little bit there.
No. I mean, that's fantastic. Like, I mean, the question is, when did they learn that I mean, it might have been too late. Like, I mean, whenever that conspiracy is over, but like, I'm hoping that that Durham could definitely go after the FBI, but maybe some of the stuff is too late. But I mean, obviously, if Iggy was closed in October 2020, there might still be hope. But I see we finally got Steve like up and ready to go. Steve, I know you're probably ready to comment on the Danchenko stuff. You in there, Steve? Can you unmute?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm here.
There we go. All right, there we go.
I'll chip in a bit later.
Okay. No, yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to comment about Durham actually going after the FBI, but I feel like it could be tough.
I'm going to jump in here to say goodbye. I have an 8:00 flight out of Dulles tomorrow morning to head back home finally after 14 days in DC. So
there we go. Thanks, Chip.
Hopefully we'll have another one of these soon, and I'll be back in.
Yeah, aloha, or whatever they say over there. All right, see you, man. Anybody else want to hop in about potentiality? What Ryan was just saying about potentiality of the FBI getting charged or anything like that? Because I feel like there should be, but I mean, I keep on going back to what they're saying in some of these filings, or that the FBI like inspection division is actually looking at a lot of this, and not really Durham. But I'm sure they might be making referrals to Durham, but not positive about that. I'm sure that if there's FBI agents that are still active, that the inspection division might be looking at it, and Durham might be looking at more of the senior people that are out of the FBI, but I can't really call it.
I have a question for you, Fool. You posted something before about the related to the Danchenko news of today and the Mar-a-Lago raid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and if if so, really really bad.
Yeah, so I mean, like, all these leaks are coming out, and every single time I hear something, I'm like, they're like, oh, that Trump might have information about confidential human sources at Mar-a-Lago, and I'm like, yeah, but like, even like we haven't seen the original 302 of Christopher Steele in October 2016 when he went to Rome. That's still redacted. Like, that could be all it is the Steele stuff, but it also could be that Igor Danchenko's all of his interviews could be in Mar-a-Lago, which none of that should be classified anymore. We all know. I mean, he probably declassified it anyways, but potentially we don't know about that. But if it is potentially classified, like, all of his confidential human source information shouldn't be classified anymore, because he's not a source. He's garbage. He should have never been a source. So if Trump had that in his castle, then he should have released it anyways. I mean, once HMM outed him, he should have just released it. But if he still had it, like, that's what, like, they're talking about all this nuclear stuff. Like, clearly it's probably about Kim Jong-un. The confidential human source stuff was probably about maybe Danchenko or anything related to that. Like, that's not a big deal at all. I mean, now that we found out about it today, that he was a human source, that should ring some bells of, people should take notice of what they're actually reporting. That if it was, that it's probably a lot of it is about Danchenko. That's how I've viewed it.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting. I mean, I've come to, just looking at timelines and stuff. I mean, just rudimentary. Yeah, it looks to me like a lot of the Mar-a-Lago stuff does have to do with Russiagate stuff. The other thing that made me think, the other thing that I was thinking, and this is entirely speculative and maybe just nuts, but just looking at this filing today, and also looking at your tweet about Mar-a-Lago, I started thinking, I think it's possible that that the Mar-a-Lago raid was not Biden's idea. I think it's entirely possible that we have a domestic intelligence service that is just entirely out of control.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I mean, if you go back to who was basically in charge of Crossfire Hurricane at the DOJ level, it was probably John Carlin, top of NSD on the DOJ side. That's counterintelligence. That's who would be at the top, and now he's Lisa Monaco's like principal associate deputy attorney general, whatever, and he's still there right now. And it's kind of like he potentially he could be getting payback, but a lot of the leaks could have been coming from him then and all the way through Trump's presidency and back till now. And a lot of these people are still the same. And obviously the NSD is involved with Durham's investigation, where he has that one guy, somebody small, and he's kind of running Durham and what can be released on the national security side. And then also with the raid, they have Jay Bratt, who's basically Loftman's replacement. Seems like it's all like National Security Division, and Carlin is kind of probably on top of Olson, like on top of that, the liaison to Monaco and all that. It's all pretty much the same people, and I just don't think it's a coincidence.
No,
I don't know.
I entirely agree. But I mean, look, does that come as a surprise to? I mean, everyone here has been looking at this for the same period of time. It's late 2016, early 2017. So at least 5 years. Are people surprised at the prospect that it might just be our intelligence services have totally lost their minds? Or is this like, yeah, we saw it 5 years ago? It's not, I know that Hans thinks that I'm especially dark and not cynical, but pessimistic, and that I thought that they were pretty bad and that things were pretty bad. But I have to say, like,
I think it's bad.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
Are people surprised though if this is the case?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I just heard tonight that Mike Lindell was like, accosted or something.
Yeah, they seized his phone. They apparently pulled him over and seized his phone. I'm not laughing, they seized his phone. Wow.
I can't believe what's happening right now, but I mean, I'm not surprised at all. These guys are totalitarians.
Yeah.
Is what it comes to.
Is anyone surprised? Anyone who's been anyone who's been like all of us watching this from
like I mean, even so, yeah. Once like this thing came out today that Danchenko was the CHS from March 2017 to 2020, like there was not like I didn't have any actual like real reaction. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And now like that probably shouldn't be the reaction, but like it's so like we've been so like downtrodden over the years. It's just like that makes complete sense. Like why? Like that's not surprising. Which it shouldn't be like that at all.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that the domestic surveillance is the scariest for me part of this. And we've discussed the FISA stuff. And I know Stevens definitely thinks that that's been overblown. And I kind of agree. But I look at some of the things we found out about Rodney Jaffe and the programs that he was working with and Georgia Tech and DARPA and how the DOJ is seemingly, there's stuff we don't know, but they seem to be using this DARPA program as their little, sandbox where if they have a problem, they just go, talk to the surveillance people down there that are doing this DNS work and God knows what else. And I think that's the thing is we have no idea how deep that iceberg goes, but we do know that you got bad players like Rodney Jaffe that has NSA connections and apparently worked for the NSA. Did we figure that out? And that is horrifying because FBI might come and go and that rot goes to the core, but these secret surveillance programs are going to control things in a way that we'll never hear about, never know about. And that is really, really scary stuff.
Yeah. Since you mentioned me in terms of the FISA, my beef with two things. I think that the surveillance is a different issue and that it's been a bit why it's overblown is that the problem has been the stuff was fabricated rather than coming from surveillance. So the FISA ended up being an entry point for it, but at the end of the day, nothing in the Russiagate hoax really came from the surveillance. It came from the dossier, which was made up. So I don't I mean, it's an important issue, but I don't think that this is the sort of hill that it should be battled on.
Yeah, I mean, getting the warrants only served for news outlets just to say that there's a person in the Trump campaign that had a warrant on them. That's basically you're right, because nothing actually of substance came from the Carter Page FISAs, and basically all of it was sequestered basically afterwards. But the lies were basically the true damaging parts to Trump and his presidency, especially into 2017, which you discuss a lot, Steve.
Yeah, the other thing, where the FISA investigation became interesting, though, is that the predicate for the continuation of Crossfire Hurricane was essentially identical to the predicate for the FISA warrants, and so that if you are sort of wanting to make the case as to why the lies matter and why Danchenko's revelations, the true things he said in January 27 mattered, it was more importantly that it undermined the predicate for Crossfire Hurricane than that it undermined the predicate for the Carter Page FISAs. But whenever Barr and especially Lindsey Graham moralized and editorialized, they went on and on about the Carter Page FISA, which was something that was too bad for Page in a way, but it was something, most of the world, hardly anybody cares about that, nor should they. But the fact that the same information and the same lies were used to perpetuate the Crossfire Hurricane is something that really did matter. And I think that both Barr and Graham stepped all over the message.
I just wanted to say something. Stephen's point was fascinating, and I think he's absolutely right that the problem wasn't the surveillance. The issue was the fabrications and the lies. But I will say there was a fascinating interview about 2 weeks ago with Derek Harvey, who on Tim Pool's podcast, Timcast, and I can't remember exactly what point. It's a long podcast. It's 3 hours. But Colonel Harvey, who worked on former Congressman Nunes's investigation, he talks about different aspects of the surveillance coming from the British side, and I'm not going to describe. I don't want to describe it here, not because I'm afraid I can't do it justice. But I highly recommend, if you guys haven't seen it, that you take a look at this. And it was on Twitter as well at different points. But it's really interesting, and I think actually that Derek is going to be on the Tim Pool podcast again tomorrow night with Congressman Nunes. I think that's right. But again, regarding the surveillance stuff, it's worth checking out this interview from about 2 weeks ago. But again, I entirely agree with Stephen, a really important point. This was about fabrication, not surveillance.
One other thing about surveillance, which I think has also kind of gone under the radar, is there were some documents that were published from Mueller that listed over 700 search warrants that Mueller issued mostly for communications between different people. And while these were not FISA warrants, they were, I think they were probably every bit as invasive for the person whose communications were seized as a FISA.
Psychologically, I think there's something going on.
When there were, and the complete, lack of interest in the 700 Mueller warrants. And I guess in that respect, we don't know how many warrants, if any, that Durham's issued, but he seems to be pretty apathetic in comparison to Mueller.
there's something going on, or that went on within the FBI and maybe the DOJ. We talk about fabrication. Most of the fabrication took place outside of those institutions. I'm talking about Steele and Danchenko and Simpson and etc. Rodney Jaffe et al. Within the government institutions, you're not going to find very many, total flaming con men or crooks who would make things up. They need psychologically a basis to do what they do. Even though they're biased and they have an agenda, they have to fall back on something. And I think that probable cause warrant, the probable cause that underpinned the Carter Page warrant, served a major function of gathering or drawing people into this and putting them in a position where they would look the other way and keep on plugging away with an investigation into basically nothing, on the theory or the presumption that a court has held there's probable cause of a crime. And until we run it to ground and show it didn't happen, we have to keep going. I think there's some of that going on.
Yeah, I take your point that the FBI people were not the ones that sort of made the original fabrications, but surely to God, after January 2017, the FBI in effect adopted the Steele fabrications as their own and became the primary proponents of it. And in the process, they concealed the admissions that Danchenko had made in December. I mean, and the motivation for that, from a strictly bureaucratic point of view, is, I think, pretty clear. That 3 weeks before the Danchenko interview, the FBI had warranted to all and sundry that the Steele network was credible, and they persuaded the intel community to include the Steele allegations in the dossier. The dossier had just gone nuclear on January the 10th. Comey was busy telling everybody in the world that this was credible and, it was unconfirmed, but a credible source. And then the worst revelation, the Danchenko, where I guess I differ from Hans in terms of the significance of the anonymous call, is that as of January 24th, rather than having a sort of a well vetted, proven network of or a layered network of credible sources, the whole thing stands at best on an anonymous call and at worst on nothing. And the FBI doesn't seem to have done any work to sort out who said what to whom in the between Danchenko and Steele. Instead, buried it. And when you read their briefing notes and talking points through March, it's as though the Danchenko admissions never happened.
I agree. That's when they, at the latest, crossed the Rubicon. That's when, if you go read Lisa Page's talking points of the meeting they had first week of March 2017, the higher-ups met with the new assistant AG who was taking over from Sessions, who was recusing himself.
Yeah, Dana Buente. Yeah, but
yeah, at that point,
and in fact, they double and just as a result of those talking points, they doubled down. I mean, they opened up. They started their first big subpoena for Flynn at the beginning of April. They ramped up the Manafort investigation in April. So after Comey went to Congress, it exploded.
But exactly. And my point is, this was run by the higher ups. It was not a low level operation at that point.
But I think from the Barnett 302, I get the impression that at that point they were squeezing out some of the doubters and the people who were fairly straight, and keeping the zealots, so that people like Curtis Heide and Brock Dolman survive into that period and into Mueller. Whereas in the Barnett 302, he mentions that one of the intel analysts, one of the mysterious analysts, is kicked off because he's a skeptic.
Which is
he wasn't a true believer.
That's all evidence that's strong evidence that this was a conspiracy at the highest levels of the FBI. They ran it, they organized it, and they made the conscious decision to go with it and get rid of any doubters along the way.
I was going to jump in.
You had a comment? Yeah.
Yeah. MB raised a couple points on Joffe that I wanted to touch on. So we just got the documents that confirmed what we had sort of suspected, that Joffe has ties to the NSA. And one thing that I've been thinking about over the last couple of days since getting those documents, I mean, this is not. You look at somebody of his station, right? He's 65. He's been an entrepreneur all his life. He's got a lot of patents, a lot of companies. He's got deep ties to the NSA, the FBI, Department of Defense. Everybody's looking to him for answers. He gets a lot of calls. He's obviously a cybersecurity advisor to President Obama. I've gotten indications that there's a couple hundred emails potentially between the two of them personally. And you look at somebody like that, and what I can't wrap my head around is what motivates somebody like that to get involved in a political scheme for the first time in his life. And obviously, there's a lot of implications that he may have fabricated some of this evidence. But what I circle back to is why. And it's never made sense. Maybe it's the NPAC contract for New Star, and he's just hoping to bump up the stock price after renegotiating that with Clinton. But I can't wrap my head around it, because I know Margot Cleveland's going to have a piece over the next couple of days. She's got the Yodaphone white paper, and you read that Yodaphone white paper that Joffe, we assume, has a hand in, and you can't reconcile how somebody of that station, who is so revered throughout the world as an expert, could draft or have a role in producing something of that low quality. It's amazing, and I don't understand. You start looking at indications of conspiracy, and King just touched on that at the highest levels of the FBI. But Joffe, to me, is the linchpin. He's the one that ties all these pieces together into a much broader, overarching conspiracy, because all of a sudden the Alpha Bank information is fabricated, and we have indications that the DNC hack itself may be fabricated, or at least, it's very, very unusual, right, that we have indications that Joffe was involved in the attribution for the DNC hack, that Manos and David Dagan were also involved with the attribution of the DNC hack. And you can't reconcile that. There's no way that this can't be a well-defined conspiracy when you take everything one after another. So covering a lot of ground. I don't know if you guys want to jump in with any points.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Has this. Trump was right about the swamp. Most of these people are garbage, right? And they want power, and they're interested in money, even if they have it. And it's pathetic and surprising that it's that obvious. But mostly it's just about money and power. That's how I see it.
See, I see Joffe as like somebody who just rose into a level that like he could never even fathom. So he's just trying to appease people throughout his entire life. I don't know if that's what it is, because he definitely doesn't have any actual technical skill, I don't think. But it seems to me like he was just trying to appease the highest people he could have ever done. Um, I really don't know if that's what it is because he had as much money as he ever wanted, but he just wanted to rise higher, and he definitely flew too close to the sun. But he's an idiot, by the way. But Steve, looks
Yeah,
like you're going to comment.
yeah. I mean, I'm extrapolating from. I know some mining guys that made $1 zillion off of fluky discoveries, and sometimes guys like that confuse sort of being lucky with being intelligent.
Yes.
And it's a bit of a hazard. The other thing is that I mean, the one guy I remember meeting. He found a big diamond mine up in the Northwest Territories, made hundreds of millions of dollars. Anyway, he ditched his wife. He started. He hooked up with Bo Derek, who I guess was
Is it 10?
of 10, and by that time she was about 55 or 60, so she was a fraction of her original 10, but still. And anyway, this guy was now worrying about Save the Tigers in order to please Bo Derek. So you just have no idea what's going on with guys. I mean, for all you know, Joffrey was trying to please his daughter or a girlfriend, or you just don't know. I don't think I wouldn't try to overthink what Joffrey's motives were. I mean, I think the whole Joffrey thing's fascinating, but I don't like, to the extent that we're focusing on Danchenko file right now. I'd love there to be an overlap, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Lee was saying about Derek Harvey, which I guess I haven't seen that interview yet. And if he was commenting about the British connection, I've always gone back to the Mark Leo Grant communique, which supposedly was delivered to the NSC and Mike Flynn January 12th, 2017, which supposedly was a communication from Mark Leo Grant, who is basically the NSA of the British Prime Minister or whatever. Same thing as what Flynn was to Trump. And it was saying that basically that they didn't have confidence in the Michael Cohen information, Prague information, and they deliver that to the NSC and to actually Michael Flynn in the transition. And there's this John Solomon article about that where somebody in the NSC had access to that communique. And now it's making sense. If Derek Harvey was in the NSC underneath Flynn, if I remember correctly. I'm right about that, right?
Yeah.
Lee?
He was in the yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Yeah,
that
he's in
makes
the
sense
NSC
to
for a
me.
while,
So
yeah, right.
that he might have been delivered that communique where early on, basically a couple days after the Steele dossier was released, the British sent them that they don't have confidence in the specific report about Michael Cohen, because I think they had some signals intelligence, and I think Steele sort of alluded to that, but signals intelligence about that they don't have confidence in those reporting, which supposedly came from Olga Galkina. But now that I'm thinking about it, that would make sense if Harvey got that originally, and supposedly that communique has never been released, and that's probably another one of those. That's one of those documents that I would like to see, and probably is one of those documents, and could have been in Mar-a-Lago, could have been in the binder, one of those things.
I hope you will check it out, because I think you're one of the few people who would be able to put it in the proper context. So yeah, I hope you do get to check it out. And again, well, I'll let you know tomorrow if Colonel Harvey's going to be on Tim Pool again tomorrow night.
Yeah,
and we'll see what we can get him to say about stuff. But yeah, I think he'd be able to put it in the proper context, because frankly, I always thought the stuff about GCHQ and how they were, allegedly it was Brennan who was, leaking to the press about this. I always thought it was kind of garbage, making it all look real. But apparently there might have been some real coordination going on with British signals intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely this story is that part is definitely real, and I always thought it was. Now I can't even remember, but I always forget. Well, I mean, rest in peace, Rich Higgins. He talked about it. He didn't really know anything about it, but now that Derek Harvey has mentioned that stuff, that would make sense if it was him.
Oh, I mean, Rich and Derek worked on Trump's
Oh, yeah.
NSC. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember asking Rich about that back in the day, and I don't think he really knew anything about this specific part, but I never had any contact with Derek, and that would make sense if he knew something about it. It's coming back to me now, but I need to listen to that. That's very interesting. I know me and Steve and others have talked about this Leo Grant communique, and it's one of those things that has never been released, and it's one of those things that I want to see, but that's pretty cool.
What are the chances that Harvey would talk about what Brennan's secret sauce was?
Oh, I mean, that's the problem. Like Cash, Harvey, all these guys go on these programs. They talk about like there's this information that potentially Putin or whoever, or there's also information that the Russians wanted Hillary and stuff like that, and they can't talk about it. So I don't think they're ever going to talk about it until like the HIPC ICA report comes out. You know,
Harvey recently came out with the story of how, I guess he was talking about the ICA, but he was very precise about how the CIA, particularly people within the CIA, totally cherry-picked the intelligence that they had to come out with the conclusion that Russia wanted to help Trump.
Yeah, that's right. And Harvey went and worked with Devin and Cash after he left the NSC, and they know. I mean, that goes into their report about the ICA. And I know me and Steve would like to see that more than probably anything else right now. But eventually, that'll see the light of day. I'm sure once if we get the House, the Republicans get the House of Representatives, that report is coming out, and all that intelligence is coming out. That's no doubt.
So they better get better staffed and better research on this, or they'll just spin their wheels the way they have so far.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like they can do the same thing to do with the Nunes memo and just vote on a declassification, which that's what I'm hoping they'll do. What do you think about that, Steve?
Sorry, my reception just went out for a minute. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh no, I was just saying. Like, remember when they did the Nunes memo? They basically voted on declassification. So hopefully they'll just vote to declassify whatever report they have, and hopefully the underlying information. Because apparently Congress has that power because they did it with the Nunes memo.
Is that what happened? I mean, I know.
That's what happened. They put it to vote to the entire House because they brought it out of committee, and then they put out the vote to the entire House, and they all voted. At least the Republicans voted to declassify the entire thing.
Okay, well,
and that was the first time they ever utilized that maneuver. So I think they can easily do it again.
Well, let's hope they do.
Which I'm actually suggesting that right now. If any of you Congress people are listening. I'm sure Lee can relay that information.
Yeah. Let's hope so.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any comments? I know Cody's been here for a while.
Actually, I've got something I wanted to say about
go for it.
About the pleading. Oh, sorry, Cody, you go ahead. I've had a chance.
He might have fell asleep. No, Steve, go ahead.
Okay, this is sort of a couple of things in the motion that I noticed today, and I don't think anybody discussed. But one of the things that Durham alleged against Danchenko is that he lied to the FBI about thinking that Millian was source D in the June 20th report, and that and then he went on into kind of a tirade about how impossible that was, which is the same sort of thing that we noticed right after the Horowitz report, long before we even knew who Danchenko was, and which really inspired much of the interest in the who the primary subsource was. But the reasoning behind Durham's pleading is really deranged, I think, because Danchenko had in the January interview told the FBI, whether this was true or not, that he had got the rumor about the paragraph 3 Trump activities from Vorontsov, and that contradicted the Report 80 attribution to Source D. And the doofuses in the January 2017 interview never pinned that down. And we have no evidence that the FBI ever subsequently pinned that down. Now, there's been lots of, just when we didn't know much about the Steele dossier or Danchenko, there was lots of puzzlement about Source D because it seems to point at somebody in the Agalarov camp rather than Millian, but it was Steele who identified Millian as Source D as well as Source E in 95 later on. But the FBI seems to have asked Danchenko kind of a sloppy question, and a lot of these arguments seem to come from sloppy FBI questioning, where they asked Danchenko in June whether Millian could be Source D in the report, and they say that Danchenko said that, well, maybe he could be, but Danchenko never took responsibility for naming the Source D the person identified as Source D as the source of it. That seems to have materialized in the Steele dossier, and none of us knows whether Danchenko lied to Steele about where he got the information from, and that he pretended it was somebody in the Agalarov camp, a Source D, rather than Vorontsov to make it look better, or whether that was fabricated by Steele. And without knowing that, we're all kind of spinning our wheels. But the Durham charge on that just seems unfounded to me.
No, yeah, he finally brought it up, and he did that with oh man, so like they went like in the filing, they also went into that oh man, what was it? They basically went into this process where Steele told them one thing, it's about the meeting with Sergey, where Steele told the FBI that Danchenko told him that he met with Sergey in New York and South Carolina, but then Danchenko told the FBI, like in the January interview, that he didn't meet with Sergey, and then in November again that he didn't meet with Sergey. So they never get to the bottom of where these lies are coming from, and they just kind of leave it at that, sort of like the 80 question you're talking about as well.
I think the problem was that Danchenko's job was to get into a room with Millian one way or another, and then anything that he claimed that Millian said, it was he said, she said. And I guess we don't know for sure if Steele believed Danchenko when they said they met, but if he did, it would make sense that he could just say, my guy told me this and you can't dispute it. And when it comes out that that Igor is such a fuck up that he couldn't even get that done, it just blew the whole thing up.
Except it didn't blow it up. It should have blown everything up, but it didn't, because the FBI
Right.
because the FBI adopted the lies and concealed it. So it should, that was Barr's point when, as soon as he read this stuff, he said, what happened after the inauguration in 2017 is a travesty, and yet 4 years later, Danchenko, Durham is charging the guy who revealed the problem. It's not.
No, yeah, like this entire like thing today is just like, it's not really Igor's fault. It's the FBI for being such dumbasses. Like, it's so dumb. And none of them have really been charged for it at all. Just making him a CHS is, I mean, I knew it was coming probably, but it's incorrigible. I don't know.
But then what did they get out of him in that? I mean, it's I agree with you that they just did it to bury it, and the ship said it. I mean, it seems transparent. But if they didn't, if they don't seem to have in all these years pinned anything down, and I'm just one thing where I was just listening earlier on. I don't think that Horowitz had any idea about anything that happened after June with Danchenko. I don't think he knew that Danchenko was.
No, yeah, I mean, you're right, because he would have probably mentioned that he was interviewed, but all he said was he was interviewed in like March and May, and then nothing past that. Because once we got the indictment, we're like, holy crap, he was interviewed many other times besides that. What was Horowitz's purview again? It was probably sort of up to Mueller, probably. I don't know. Just Crossfire Hurricane and
Horowitz
and the FISAs.
Horowitz. It's I reread that over the last couple of days to try to figure out what Horowitz's exact terms of reference were. It seems to have been, for some reason, fairly closely tied to the Carter Page FISA interviews, which is what he reported on. And when we wonder why he didn't take more interest in the implications of the, say, Danchenko admissions on the Crossfire predicate, I think it's in part because he was the one that discovered this January interview, which had been buried. And I guess, and I'm thinking that maybe the only, what we may have learned today is maybe the reason why we've only seen the January interview is that everything from March on was buried in the CHS system.
No, that's 100%. That's why. That's got to be why. Because he only, like, if you look at it, he only interviews Danchenko's handler, basically from the Washington field office. After that, he probably didn't have any access to the actual CHS reports. And obviously, the tell was that we only got the electronic communication from January 2017. Why didn't we get anything else? And that's because he was at CHS and it was buried.
I'd always imagined, not always, I imagined since that report came out that maybe Durham was using those March and May interviews, which were referred to in the IG report, for his investigation. But now we see it. I mean, he may be, but now we see it was about something else. I just have to. I mean, my interpretation of what's been going on for the last several years is that deciding between who lied more or who's the bigger problem, Danchenko or Steele. I mean, the way that I've seen this from the beginning is that the FBI outsourced its lies. And they outsourced it. They set up a whole bunch of buffers throughout the system. And Danchenko was useful in some ways, and Steele was useful in others. And the way that Steele was useful as this beautiful MI6 man, Danchenko was useful as an actual Russian. First, he was going to be someone who was giving genuine Russian information. And then if they got caught, he was someone who's going to be giving Russian disinformation. And so that's my concern. That's been my concern about the Durham investigation. And I've I've tried to be open-minded and see like, well, look, he's providing information. He's got this right. He's got that right. But big picture stuff doesn't look good. And I don't think he has. I think he knows the big picture stuff. I think it's not going to come out. And that's an unpleasant way, I know, to say good night to everyone. But I'm going to take off. But Fool and everyone else, I look forward to talking to you guys soon. And I mean, this is interesting news and exciting news. I hope we have good news soon, especially starting with the trial. I'm hopeful. Fool, you are the guy who keeps up my hope in different ways, both with what you know and your just your sense of the world and your sense of justice and your sense of God. So thank you, man, for all of
Well,
that.
thanks, Lee, well, thanks for showing up. And yeah, I think I'm going to actually go to the trial. So if anybody wants to meet me there.
Wow, great. All right.
Let's do it. I mean, hopefully we get some of those charges. Like you're saying, like, honestly, when I was reading this thing today, I'm like, I feel like Iggy is like, I hate saying this. I feel like he's like a victim of the FBI again. Like, he was basically telling what they wanted and they were taking it. Just going back to the original January 2017 meeting, he had his lawyer there. He had the immunity deal. They took his information. They're like, "Oh, this is gold. Let's make you a CHS after this. You got this magical phone where random Russians will just call you."
Yeah, right.
We'll get some more of that. So
we'll pay you.
Yeah, we'll pay you
phone.
whatever you want to say. But like, seriously, like, I've seen like Iggy like on, he's blocked me, but I've seen him on Twitter and like I feel bad for him. Like, he's said some terrible lies, but it was all, it's the Clinton campaign. That's what they wanted, and then the FBI what they wanted. He was just abused. Right. And he obviously abused Sergey, but I feel like Sergey's even like sort of sympathetic to the dude. And you're right. You're right. Everybody's right. The FBI is, and our government is the true villain. The true villain.
Sergey would give him a break because Sergey has one of the biggest hearts ever, man. God
he
bless
does,
that
yeah.
guy. I wish he was listening tonight, but I know he's on Twitter. So
I'm sure he'll listen to it later.
Yeah.
I'm telling him to come. I'm telling him to come room with me at the Danchenko trial.
That would be great. Well, I've long said to him, I said, well, whenever you come back to the U.S., I'm going to buy you dinner wherever you are. We'll meet somewhere. So, well, look, Fool, thank you so much again, and thanks to everyone else. So I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again.
All right, see you, Lee. Thanks,
Bye.
man.
God bless you guys. Bye.
For sure. God bless you too. All right. Anybody else got any comments?
Can I just follow up on what Lee just said? Because I think it's really important that what Igor meant to the FBI as far as here's a guy we can get to say anything pretty much, and I don't think that ends in the summer of 2017. He's now a confidential human source, and he's got to produce stuff every 90 days apparently, and even if it's just gossip, whatever it is, and he's in, he's the CHS. So what is he feeding them? And it's these same bad actors that are handling him, we would assume, at least some of them. And this is the guy you can go to and just say, like, whatever you want, he's going to give it to you. And so I guess my point is, does Danchenko's bullshit go further than this in ways that we can't, in who knows where, what case or what, investigations, but the guy's poison, and who knows how far that poison spread in 2.5 years.
I think so, potentially.
Yeah, I want to sort of argue against the sort of the anti-Danchenko tide here. I remain of the view that he mostly told the truth, and certainly in the January 2017 interview, and that that some of the the lies being charged against him by Durham are really trumped up, and that it was the truth that Danchenko told that the FBI didn't want to hear. So he was telling FBI stuff that they didn't expect. As somebody mentioned earlier, the FBI expected him to verify what Steele had told them in October and what the dossier said, and he didn't. I mean, he undermined it.
No, that's a good point.
So I don't, and even these other things, when you start parsing the defense comments, I just don't believe I don't think that any of the specific lies that they've charged against him actually stand up. Even this crazy anonymous call. I mean, the way Durham's going about it doesn't make any sense because they haven't proven that there wasn't an anonymous call. They're just arguing that he didn't believe it was Millian, and the arguments I think are very strained. I mean, he could have believed that it was Millian. Let's say he received some random call and he believed it was Millian in July, but by August he wasn't so sure. That just seems to me fairly similar to, say, for example, Papadopoulos thinking that Mifsud was somebody that had important contacts in April, and then by the time he was interviewed by the FBI, thinking that Mifsud was a nothing. And it doesn't, he changed his view in that time. So I just don't see anything to the idea that Danchenko was serially lying to the FBI in these Queen for a Day interviews. I just don't buy.
No, yeah, I mean, like that case isn't strong at all, and I think Marcy Wheeler makes a good point. Like this call thing, without actually their way of proving that it didn't happen is sort of ridiculous, but also, like I was saying to Lee, like his magic phone, like that maybe the FBI really liked that, but you're right about that it doesn't stand up at all because they don't actually offer any real evidence like his phone records or anything like that. This call didn't happen, or Sergei's phone records that this call didn't happen. Really weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, Mueller sort of subpoenaed every damn phone that anybody ever looked at, in his 700 search warrants. I mean, why didn't Durham, why didn't somebody actually subpoena Danchenko's phones or their phone records? I mean, and then check out every single call. I mean, that's what Mueller and Weissman did.
Not yet. He definitely. I mean,
well.
I don't know what's going on with that because it doesn't make any sense.
Aren't we getting ahead of ourselves a little bit? I mean, is there any reason to believe that won't be introduced at trial?
Durham has hinted at it. He has said that Millian's phone was turned off over that period of time.
Oh yeah, I did see that today.
So that means he's got the records.
No, but I mean, we've known all along that Millian didn't make the call. I mean, Durham keeps arguing a lot of things that aren't really at issue. Like he keeps trying to prove that Millian didn't make the call. Well, we've known that forever. The issue is whether there was some anonymous call, and that can only be proven by examining Danchenko's records.
Yep.
But my point is, he's got Millian's records. Every reason to believe he has Danchenko's records too. So he doesn't need Millian in person to prove that Millian didn't make a call with his own phone.
No, but he's not.
But why wouldn't he introduce that yet?
But
what's the point of that?
Nobody's like Danchenko isn't saying that Millian called him. He just said he believes it. They have to do it from Danchenko's records. Millian's records.
My point is, if he's got Millian's records, he's got Danchenko's records. That's the way prosecutors work. If they're trying to prove a phone call happened or didn't happen, they get both sides records. So they've got some records. Whether
But
it's enough to prove that the negative, I don't know. We just
but
have to wait and see.
they didn't charge the negative in the pleadings. The fact they said that they weren't charged, they said they weren't arguing that they weren't going to. They were in effect stipulating that there could have been an anonymous call. It's just
That's not what Durham wrote today. He said no call happened, none.
well, it's not that. Yeah, that's not what they charged him for.
I know that's the charge. The language in the charge is ambiguous. The defense picked up on that and ran with it. But Durham, in his brief, said there was no call, and Milliam wasn't neither a call nor Millian on a call.
Okay. Wouldn't he then have to produce in the sort of discovery all of the phone records so that the defense can look at it?
Yes, I would assume so.
Would that have happened already or not?
It would have happened, yes. So to what extent he's got records to actually show that, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Thanks.
King, would he turn over Danchenko's own records to him, or is that outside the discovery process?
He would have to produce exculpatory, and then at some point he has to exchange exhibits. I don't know when, or list exhibits. So we're right up on that.
Gotcha.
All right. Anybody have any questions, comments, or anything like that before we head out of here?
Hey, is the Dolan letter that Igor gave to Steele, was that something new or was that something we already knew?
I think we saw that before.
And the return email from Orbis that had an attachment from, they weren't clear if Igor wrote the attachment, but it was from a report from Orbis in April 2016.
Yeah, I remember when I saw that. Well, I mean, when I read it today, I was like, I think I remember that Danchenko was passing on information to Dolan that he was working for Steele or whatever. It didn't come across new to me, but somebody else might be able to comment on that.
I think there's a reference to that, right? Because I think in the indictment they kind of laid out the initial contact was in April, and then the indictment went into their connection with Organizer 1 and sort of that timeline. But I remember it starting in April.
Yeah, just that direct connection between Steele and Dolan was really interesting to me. I didn't remember that, but maybe we already knew that. But that just seemed like that would be fuel on a fire of, if you want to paint Dolan as a bad actor coming, at behest of the Clintons, that's pretty interesting little tidbit. I don't, by the way, necessarily believe that. I think Dolan might just be some asshole that's making money in Russia, as any good Clinton would. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, my take on Dolan is that his stuff is entirely innocent. Durham is certainly trying to portray him as some kind of person of interest and the source of important things, but it really, from all evidence, Dolan just gave some garden variety chicken feed evidence to Danchenko, which then between Danchenko and Steele was embellished into a story. But Dolan was not in any sense. I don't see him as some sort of devious mastermind in all of this.
Yeah, he seems cooperative, and especially that what seems like he was, connected to Tucker Carlson too, which I thought was interesting. And they're working together.
Dolan?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you remember that story that came out that Tucker Carlson was trying to reach out to an intermediary to the Kremlin? Yeah. I think it was actually Dolan because they have emails of Tucker Carlson to Charles Dolan and stuff like that, and Dolan has commented on how back in the day Republicans and Democrats would work together to do other stuff, but He seems like an old school Democrat, but who knows? And he works with Steve Kupka, who's a Republican. So
Yeah, they just seem like ordinary grifters in
yeah, exactly.
or high sort of upper end, sort of high end grifters.
High end grifters. Hey, we got Walk of Fire here. What's up, Walk?
Hey, what's up, everybody? I had to join pretty late. I've just been kind of sitting here listening to most of it because I'm not sure what's already been covered, but glad I could catch some of this.
Yeah, it's been fun. Did you get to see? I mean, what's your main takeaway?
Well, first thing reason I joined as speaker was the letter to Dolan. Yes, we have seen that before, and even the title of that report from Orbis was in either the indictment or something, because I remember trying to figure
that's
out
what I was thinking.
The NAS door or something, which is interesting because that's means surveillance. So it's like the banking sector, compromat and surveillance, which take from that what you will. Overall, I've only got to read the filing today real quick. I remember being excited about a lot of the things I saw, but I can't think of anything specific at the moment right now. I think it's interesting. I'm King, to your point, and I'd have to look at it again, but I think the filing kind of used the same ambiguity as before as to whether the phone call occurred. I think it was phone call occurred. No such phone call occurred from Millian or something like that. So it's still ambiguous as to whether there was a phone call. I'd have to go look at it again. But I think it's still a little ambiguous about whether or not there was a phone call.
Well, that's kind of embarrassing. Like Steve was saying, it needs to be on Danchenko's side to prove their case, I would imagine.
Right. Well, and but you would think also wouldn't Danchenko in one of his motion to dismiss have said something about, here's when I got the call.
Yeah, this is when I got the call, exactly. Yeah.
So it's almost like both sides are avoiding that issue. My kind of baseless theory is that yes, there was a phone call. The question is, did Danchenko also know it was fake, or was he not really in on it? I don't think he thought it was Millian. I think it was all kind of a parallel construction thing to connect Millian with Danchenko. Just because.
Do you think in Danchenko's immunity agreement he got to bleach bit his phones and destroy all his devices?
It's been known to happen.
It's happened once or twice.
Yeah, that Hillary stuff that all of her, but my emails. And I was just thinking about that the other day, and I was like, basically, your whole argument here, Hillary, that you had no emails on your server still, is that you're better at obstructing than Trump is? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, she's trying to. She's trying to out obstruct him.
Right. It's ridiculous.
But I also think maybe she doesn't actually know. She's that dumb. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. It's always been wild to me.
That's true. A lot of these people don't know. I mean, just like we all say about Trump, there's probably so much in the nitty gritty details that he doesn't even know or understand.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else got anything? Walk of Fire? Anything else besides that?
Not that I can think of in the moment.
Dope. We can take some questions, probably, if anybody has any. If not, I'm pretty much ready to go to sleep. We got Matt Beebe coming in. Let's see. Whoop. Matt, are you in here? I know Cody's been in here for a while on the speaker. Hasn't said anything. 279er's been in here.
What's the latest thinking on how Mar-a-Lago turns out?
Who? I mean, I'm not even ready to tackle that because I feel like that issue is so political that you could never make an actual clean case. I mean, I'm sure King would have like a lot of opinions on that, but to me, it's not. They're not going to actually go for any indictments. They might maybe indict a lawyer or something potentially, but I don't think they're going to go the whole way. And with the special master stuff, who knows? I didn't read the filings today. I'm just not really that interested in it or really care what's going to happen because I feel like at the end of the day, I don't think they're actually going to go. It's like a political exercise more than anything. Anyone else have any comment on that?
I mean, I would probably agree. It's, they're going to do what they're going to do, and it's going to be probably political one way or the other. So, I mean, I think we have a pretty good idea of the basic facts. I mean, clearly there's a bunch we don't know, but ultimately I may have said this in the last one, there's a huge difference in, Trump having classified documents, in his cellar. His goal, big picture, was to try and get this stuff out to the people, not to cover it up or destroy it or anything like that, versus, a certain other candidate from a previous election cycle. So, I mean, whether or not he was careless or, ripped a couple of them up or whatever, I just don't care. And all I'm going to do is get myself all stressed and upset if I try and dig into it and say, this is super unfair what they're doing to him. I'm just going to have to watch it play out.
That's where I'm at. Johnny Dice, you there?
Yes, thank you. I was very optimistic with Durham in the very beginning, but I've shifted to the point where I think he's dragging us down the Clinton rabbit hole every chance he can get to get us away from the FBI. Even though he teases us a little bit every once in a while, it's really to distract us from I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I want to call it crimes because I don't know if I can point to a specific crime, but the bias that was there. So I think, in a whole, I think Durham is turned out to be the swamp. We're going to sink Clinton to drift away from the real problem, which was the FBI. And I would love to know anybody else's opinion on that. Is anybody else discouraged? Because I don't see it changing.
I just feel like the problem is he's under a different DOJ, and there probably might be tugging him back a little bit. But I feel like the problem is with Durham that he has to make these cases against Danchenko, against a corrupt FBI, so he can't really go after the FBI at the same time. I talk about this a lot, but...
Well, I mean, I guess at some point he's going to issue a final report, and if his report is less than scathing on the FBI and their actions here, then it's another flush, it's another wash. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure he probably will not do that. I'm pretty sure he's probably gonna go hard on the FBI, but I mean, at this point, I feel like there's not many people left from that time period that he can even go against because they're all fired anyway. So I don't know. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be expecting from this report. I just want to hear about some of the foreign intelligence stuff, whatever stuff we haven't heard about. I'm so sick of hearing about the FBI side of it. Like, we already know they're freaking corrupt. Like, Horowitz already told us that. I want to hear more about, like, the CIA side, NSA side, stuff like that, in my opinion, from
Well, I guess
Durham.
that's part of the point. So when Durham was tasked with his mission, uh, you know, Nunez has already done the dirty work. The Horowitz has already done the dirty work. So, in other words, he kind of ignored it, and he just went down the rabbit hole that he thought would, make people happy, which was Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, but what more did you want? I don't know. It's hard to parse it. I mean, he hit Klein Smith first and then moved on to other things. And he might come back. Who knows?
Well, I guess that's the point, is he went Klein Smith first, and then he went down the Clinton rabbit hole. So it's almost like he touched on it, and then he left it there. I don't think he's going to go back there. That's just how I feel. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for everybody's time.
Yeah, for sure, man. Anybody else got anything? Going once. Going twice. All right, well, this is awesome. I felt like we got a pretty good drop today. I don't think it was that surprising that Igor was a CHS. I mean, it's whatever the FBI does in the past or in this day and time is not surprising to me. So it kind of sucks, but I like the motion, and maybe we'll get some more heading up into the trial. And if anybody's thinking about going to the trial, let me know, because I think I might head up there. I think Ryan's talked about it. MB's talked about it. It'd be great to see some of you guys there. And, maybe we should probably congregate in numbers just so we don't get whacked by some other opposition forces. Anybody else want to sign off, say goodbye? If not, it was a great pleasure again. MB, what's up?
Yeah,
you unmuted.
Say good night. This was super disappointing because your last Igor Spaces went 6 hours. This one's like 2.5. So I apologize on everyone's behalf that did not reach that bar.
Well, I don't have that stamina. I'm getting older now. Steve, you got anything to say? I saw you're unmuted.
No, I just was accidentally unmuted.
Oh, gotcha. Well, it was good. It was good having you on tonight. It took you a while. It took a while to get you back on because this app sort of isn't the best. And it's good to have you on, though, discussing this again.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Well, we'll see you guys next time, and if not on the Spaces, then maybe in Washington D.C. for the great Igor trial.
See you later.
All right. See you, man.